Many years later, the people of Boma still speak of the night the ocean rose higher than the sky and swallowed half the town. They remember the screaming winds, the shattered boats, the houses torn apart like paper, and the lone figure standing on the shore, her white dress floating in the darkness like a ghost. They say the waves bowed to her before closing in, taking her with them, and leaving only silence behind. That girl was Grace. And long before the sea claimed her, the ocean had already chosen her. If you think this baby is cute, like and subscribe. Boma was a small fishing village on the West African coast, a place where the salt in the air seeped into every breath and the scent of smoked fish lingered on every street. The people lived by the tide's mercy, blessing it when it brought fish, cursing it when it swallowed their boats. For most, the sea was a provider, but for Grace, even as a child, it was something far deeper. At 6, she had wandered into the waves and returned with a bleeding boy she had somehow pulled from the current. At 9, she placed her hand on a fevered child's forehead, and by morning the sickness was gone. Her beauty bloomed early, with skin the deep brown of wet earth after rain, and eyes so dark they seemed to pull the light inward. Yet behind that beauty was something that made people uneasy. When Grace looked at the sea, it felt as if she was listening to a voice only she could hear. Some whispered it was the gift of the spirits, others said it was a curse. But Grace never spoke of it. She only kept going to the shore at dusk, sitting quietly as if waiting for someone to arrive. It was during the annual Moon Tide Festival that everything changed for Grace. The festival was Boma's way of honoring the sea goddess, Umaya, who, according to the elders, ruled all waters and watched over the town. That night, the moon hung full and golden above the horizon, turning the waves into a silver path stretching into the distance. Lanterns floated on the water, carrying prayers for wealth, health, and safe voyages. Grace had gone to the shore with her family, dressed in a flowing white wrapper that fluttered in the breeze. The music of drums and flutes carried through the night, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted fish and palm wine. Yet, while others laughed and danced, Grace felt a strange pull, like invisible hands tugging at her from the sea. She wandered to the edge of the waves, her toes sinking into the cool sand. That was when it happened. The tide surged forward, though the sea had been calm moments before. A wall of water rose, but instead of crashing, it parted before her. In the center stood a tall, glowing figure made of water, her face beautiful yet terrifying, her eyes deep like the ocean floor. No one else seemed to notice, only Grace could see her. The goddess's voice flowed into her mind without sound, "You are mine." The moment passed in a heartbeat. The waves receded, the figure was gone, and Grace was left trembling, her wrapper soaked. She didn't tell her family what she had seen. But that night, she dreamed of the sea carrying her away to a palace of coral and pearl, where the goddess sat on a throne, smiling. When she woke, her skin still smelled faintly of salt. The morning after the festival, strange things began to happen around Grace. When she touched a fishing net tangled with seaweed, it slipped free without effort, as if the ocean itself obeyed her hands. A fisherman with a deep gash on his palm swore the wound closed after she wrapped it in a strip of cloth. The news spread quickly. Grace, the girl with the sea's blessing, had powers no one could explain. At first, her family dismissed it as gossip. But soon, people began arriving at their small wooden house from neighboring villages, women with sick children, men whose boats had been overturned by storms, elders asking for blessings over their nets. Grace did what she could, though she never understood how it worked. She only knew that whenever she helped, a faint sound of waves filled her ears, even far from the shore. With the growing attention came whispers. Some claimed she was chosen by Umaya herself, destined for greatness. Others muttered that she was cursed, a spirit's child, and that her beauty was a lure meant to draw men into the sea. Grace ignored them, but the words lingered. She found herself visiting the shore more often, sitting for hours, letting the tide wash over her feet. The ocean seemed to speak in pulses, soft, rhythmic, like a heart beating beneath the waves. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, Grace saw something shimmering far out at sea. It was too large for a fish, too still for a boat. She blinked, and it was gone. But in that brief moment, she felt the same presence from the festival night, the same silent voice whispering in her mind, "Soon." 2 weeks after the Moontide Festival, Grace awoke to the sound of voices outside her family's home. Her father, normally a quiet fisherman, was speaking with excitement to a group of elders. At the center of the small crowd lay a wooden chest, wet and glistening as though it had just been pulled from the bottom of the sea. No one knew where it came from. It was simply found at the doorstep before dawn. Inside were treasures no one in Boma had ever seen: pearls as large as marbles, coral branches carved into the shapes of birds, and a necklace made of gold beads so pure they seemed to glow in the morning light. Grace's mother gasped, crossing herself, while her father murmured that such a gift could only be from the goddess herself. They decided it must be an offering of gratitude for the help Grace had given to so many. The days that followed were unlike anything her family had known. Her father sold just one pearl and returned with enough money to rebuild their home and buy a new fishing boat. People began treating them with a mix of reverence and fear. No one dared to cross Grace, though she had never harmed anyone. And yet, beneath her family's joy, Grace felt a quiet unease. At night, she began to dream again of the palace under the sea. Each time, the goddess would place the golden necklace around her neck, whispering that it was a wedding gift. Grace would wake with her skin cold and damp, as if she had been swimming in the depths. And each morning, the sound of the ocean outside seemed a little louder, as though the tide itself was drawing nearer to her door. It began subtly. Some nights, Grace's mother would check her room and find her asleep, but her bed would be empty by dawn. They assumed she had gone to fetch water or sit by the shore, but when asked, Grace would only smile faintly and say she had been dreaming. Still, her skin would be damp, her hair dripping salt water onto the floor. The neighbors began to notice. Fishermen swore they saw her walking along the beach at midnight, her white wrapper glowing under the moonlight. One man claimed she walked straight into the waves and vanished, returning only when the tide changed. Others whispered that she was no longer fully human, that she belonged to the sea now. Grace tried to deny it, but deep inside, she knew the truth. She could not remember leaving her room, yet each time she woke, there was sand between her toes and the faint taste of salt on her lips. The voice of the goddess was clearer now, no longer a whisper but a song calling her name, promising that her true home was waiting beneath the waves. Her parents, though grateful for the wealth, grew uneasy. They barred the doors at night and hid the necklace in a locked box. But the next morning, the box was open, the necklace gone, and Grace was sitting by the shore wearing it, staring at the horizon. When they tried to bring her home, the wind rose and the waves crashed violently, as if the sea itself was warning them not to interfere. By the end of that month, Grace's family had more than they had ever dreamed of. Fresh crates of fish would appear in her father's boat even when he hadn't gone to sea. Rare shells and polished stones washed up directly in front of their home, fetching high prices from traders. Their once modest hut now had carved wooden doors and bright fabrics from distant markets. But with wealth came distance. Neighbors who once chatted with her mother now kept their voices low when passing by. Children were told not to play near Grace, as if her shadow carried danger. The church elders came to speak with her father, warning him that no blessing came without a price. Grace could feel the shift, people's eyes lingered on her, not with admiration but with fear. The dreams grew more vivid. She no longer saw only the palace, now she swam alongside glowing fish the size of canoes, her hair drifting like seaweed around her face. The goddess would take her hand and guide her deeper, pointing to vast gardens of coral and silver sands. "This will be yours," the goddess would say, "but only if you return." Her mother tried to distract her, keeping her busy with chores and visits to relatives inland. But even far from the shore, Grace could feel the ocean's pull. Streams and ponds reflected not the sky but the dark, shifting depths of the sea. At night, the sound of waves followed her into her dreams, steady and endless, like a heartbeat she could no longer ignore. One misty morning, as the fishermen pulled in their nets, they spotted a lone figure walking along the beach. He was tall, with skin the color of polished ebony and eyes as deep and dark as the ocean itself. His clothes were unlike anything from Boma, woven with shimmering threads that caught the light like fish scales. No one had seen him arrive, yet his footprints trailed only from the direction of the sea. He asked for Grace by name. The elders, unsettled, refused to answer, but the stranger only smiled as if he already knew where to find her. When he reached her home, Grace was outside, washing a basket of shells. The moment their eyes met, a strange calm settled over her, as though she had known him all her life. He introduced himself simply as Malik, a messenger of Umaya. Malik told her that the goddess had chosen her long ago, and that the gifts she and her family enjoyed were not free, they were part of a bridal dowry. The nightly walks, the dreams, the treasures, all had been steps toward preparing her to take her rightful place in the undersea realm. He said the time was near. Grace's parents demanded that he leave, but Malik only bowed politely and promised to return with the next full moon. Before he left, he placed a small conch shell in Grace's hand. When she held it to her ear, she did not hear the usual rush of the sea. Instead, she heard her own name, whispered over and over, growing softer until it faded like a wave pulling back into the depths. That night, Grace's grandmother, Mama Sua, came to visit. The old woman was known for her knowledge of the old ways and for stories that were half memory, half myth. When she heard about Malik's visit, her face tightened, and her voice dropped to a whisper. She told Grace about the last girl chosen by Umaya many years ago, a fisherman's daughter named Nia. Nia had been beautiful, kind, and blessed with the same strange gifts. But on the night of her wedding to a man from the village, a storm came without warning. The waves swallowed the shore, and Nia vanished. Some said she had drowned. Others believed she had been taken to the goddess's palace, never to return. Mama Sua warned that no one could bargain with the sea. Umaya gave generously, but she also took what she wanted without mercy. "Child," she said, holding Grace's hands, "you must not let the ocean claim you. Once you step into her world, you will not come back." Grace listened quietly, but in her heart, she felt torn. The goddess's call was not one of fear, it was gentle, almost loving. The sea did not feel like a prison to her, it felt like home. Yet the sorrow in her grandmother's eyes made her hesitate. When Mama Sua left, she pressed a small leather pouch into Grace's palm. Inside was a piece of smooth black stone. "This is from the river that feeds the sea," she said. "It will keep the waves from pulling you under. Keep it close, and remember, love the ocean, but do not belong to it." When the next full moon arrived, Boma was alive with celebration. The fisherman had returned with an abundant catch, and the air smelled of roasted mackerel and sweet plantain. Music filled the night, and the waves shimmered like molten silver under the moonlight. It was tradition to give thanks to Umaya with song, dance, and offerings at the shore. Grace's family joined the crowd, but her parents kept a close watch on her. She wore a blue wrapper patterned with white shells, and around her neck hung the black stone her grandmother had given her. The conch shell from Malik lay hidden in her palm, warm as though it had been sitting in the sun. As the drummers played, Grace felt a vibration in her bones. The air thickened, and the sea seemed to lean forward, each wave stretching a little farther onto the sand. Then, through the crowd, Malik appeared. His smile was calm, but his eyes held an urgency that made her breath catch. He beckoned her toward the water. Her father stepped in front of her, refusing to let her go. But Malik spoke softly, saying the goddess would not be patient much longer. He claimed the wave that would come next month would not be kind if Grace was still on land. The music faltered, the dancers slowed, and a hush fell over the shore. Even those who feared Grace knew the sea's wrath was not to be tested. Malik left without another word, but the look he gave Grace as he turned away made her heart pound. For the first time, she wondered if resisting the call might not only endanger her but everyone she loved. That night, Grace's sleep was heavy and full of water. She found herself standing on the ocean floor, the sand cool beneath her bare feet, schools of silver fish swirling past her like ribbons. In the distance rose a palace of coral and pearl, its towers swaying gently as though breathing. At its gates stood Umaya, taller than any human, her flowing gown made of water that shimmered with moonlight. The goddess smiled, extending her hand. Grace hesitated, but when their palms touched, warmth spread through her body. Umaya led her inside, past walls lined with glowing shells and gardens where seaweed danced in slow motion. Voices hummed from every corner, ancient and soothing, as if the sea itself was speaking. They came to a great hall where a throne carved from whale bone stood. On it rested a crown of shells and gold. "This is your place," Umaya said, her voice as deep as the tide. "You are not just my bride, you are my daughter in spirit. Here, no sickness will touch you, no hunger will follow you, and no death will claim you." Grace felt herself longing to say yes, to surrender to the beauty and peace of the place. But then she thought of her parents, of Mama Sua's warning, of the children in the village who still looked for her smile. The thought was like a heavy stone pulling her upward. She woke gasping, the sheets clinging to her as if soaked. In her hand was a small, perfect pearl, still wet. It was no dream. The next morning, the shoreline of Boma was covered in strange gifts. Dozens of starfish glittered in the sun, shells of colors no one had seen before lay scattered across the sand, and fish with silver scales washed ashore still alive, flipping weakly as if waiting for someone to claim them. The villagers murmured that the sea was restless. Grace walked among the offerings, her bare feet sinking into the wet sand. Every time she bent to touch a shell, she felt a pulse through her fingertips, as if the ocean's heart was beating inside it. She could sense the goddess's presence everywhere, in the hiss of the waves, in the salt on her lips, even in the gulls' cries overhead. Her father pulled her away, saying they must not take anything from the shore that day. But as they turned to leave, Grace saw Malik standing at the water's edge. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made her uneasy, a quiet certainty, as if he already knew how this would end. That evening, the tide did not recede as it usually did. Instead, it crept closer, licking at the edges of the village like a predator testing its prey. Some of the elders began preparing offerings to comb the goddess, baskets of fruit, jars of palm wine, and fish wrapped in banana leaves. But Mama Sua shook her head, saying these were not gifts the sea wanted. When Grace lay down to sleep, she heard a whisper, not from the conch, not from Malik, but from the waves themselves. You cannot run when the tide rises. 3 days later, Malik returned, this time in the bright light of morning. He walked through the marketplace without hurry, the crowd parting around him as though guided by an unseen hand. Grace's parents were outside their home when he arrived, their faces tense. He spoke plainly. Umaya would send a great wave at the next full moon, one that could either bless or destroy Boma. The only way to protect the village, he said, was for Grace to come willingly to the sea before that night. If she resisted, the goddess would take her by force, and the ocean would not be gentle. Grace's father refused immediately, saying no wealth or safety was worth his daughter's life. Her mother stood silent, torn between fear and the knowledge that the sea had already claimed too much of Grace's heart. Malik listened without argument, then turned to Grace. The choice will come to you, he said. And when it does, remember, the tide waits for no one. After he left, the village was divided. Some believed Grace should go to save them all. Others argued it was wrong to sacrifice her, even to a goddess. The air grew thick with tension, and every conversation seemed to circle back to her fate. That night, Grace walked to the shore alone. The moon was just a sliver, but the water glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath. She thought of the palace, of the peace it promised, and of the people who would suffer if she refused. She also thought of Mama Sua's stone, warm against her skin, reminding her that even the sea could be resisted. A week before the full moon, the weather turned strange. The sky remained clear, yet the waves crashed harder than they should, sending sprays of foam high into the air. Boats tied at the dock groaned against their ropes, and the gulls flew inland, as if fleeing something unseen. One evening, a sudden wind ripped through Boma, toppling baskets in the market and slamming doors shut. Grace was standing near the shore when the water surged forward, soaking her to the knees. In the foam, she saw shapes, long, flowing figures that flickered in and out of sight. They were not human, but they bowed to her before melting back into the sea. The villagers began to panic. Elders muttered about omens, mothers gathered their children indoors, and fishermen refused to sail. All eyes turned to Grace, some with pleading, others with quiet resentment. It was as if her presence alone was the reason for the unrest. That night, Malik appeared once more. He told her the storm was only a whisper of what would come if she refused the call. The wave on the night of the full moon would be taller than the tallest palm, strong enough to sweep away every home in Boma. If you come willingly, he said, the wave will break before it reaches the shore. If not, he let the sentence hang. Grace felt the weight of the village pressing on her. In her dreams, Umaya's voice was no longer gentle, it was insistent, rhythmic, like the pounding of a drum. The tide was rising, and there was no more time to pretend she could ignore it. The elders of Boma gathered in the meeting hut, their faces drawn and weary. The air smelled of burning palm oil from the lamps, and outside, the wind whistled through the narrow streets. Grace was called to stand before them, her parents at her side. The eldest among them, Chief Oko, spoke first. He reminded everyone of the sea's blessings over the past months, the abundance of fish, the wealth from the pearls, the protection from storms. But he also spoke of the danger they now faced, and how no offering of food or gold could match the gift the goddess demanded. "The wave is coming," he said. "And only one among us can stop it." Grace's father slammed his fist against the wooden floor, refusing to let the council decide his daughter's fate. But murmurs spread through the room, fearful voices saying they could not risk the lives of the entire village for one person. Some eyes refused to meet Grace's, while others looked at her as if begging her to be their savior. Finally, the council gave their verdict. They would prepare a farewell ceremony for Grace on the night before the full moon, offering her to the goddess in peace so that the sea might spare them. It was not a command, they said, but a plea. The choice was still hers, but everyone now knew what her refusal would mean. As Grace walked out of the meeting hut, the villagers' stares burned into her back. The sea roared in the distance, and for the first time, she felt not just its call, but its hunger. That night, Grace could not sleep. The thought of the farewell ceremony haunted her, and the sound of the waves outside felt louder than ever. She sat by the fire in the corner of the hut until Mama Sua appeared at the doorway, leaning heavily on her carved walking stick. Her grandmother asked her to follow quietly. They walked through the darkened village to a small grove of palm trees inland. There, hidden in the roots of one massive tree, Mama Sua dug out a small clay jar wrapped in old cloth. Inside was a string of beads, blue, white, and black, that glimmered faintly in the moonlight. She explained that they were not just ornaments, but charms passed down from the first women of their family. Worn together, they could mask the wearer's spirit from being sensed by the sea. "Your mother never needed them," Mama Sua said, "but I kept them for the one who would." Grace touched the beads, feeling their cool weight in her palm. Her grandmother's voice trembled as she told her she still had a choice. Not all bargains with the sea had to be kept, and not all calls must be answered. But refusing might bring the wave, and Mama Sua admitted she did not know if the charms could protect the whole village. Grace slipped the beads over her neck. For a moment, the sound of the waves in her mind went silent, replaced by the steadied beat of her own heart. It was the first time in months she felt alone with her thoughts, and the first time she truly wondered if she could walk away from the goddess entirely. Goddess entirely. The day before the full moon, Boma felt strangely still. The air was heavy, as though the entire village was holding its breath. The sea was calm, too calm. Even the smallest waves seemed to stop just short of the shore, retreating quietly as if gathering their strength. Grace moved through the streets feeling the weight of every glance. Some villagers avoided her, others touched her arm softly, murmuring blessings under their breath. Her parents stayed close, but their faces were lined with exhaustion from sleepless nights. Mama Sua sat outside the hut, humming old songs and fingering her prayer beads, her eyes fixed on the horizon. By evening, the farewell preparations had begun. Mats were spread along the shore, and baskets of offerings were piled high with fruit, flowers, and smoked fish. Drummers tapped out a slow, steady rhythm, not for dancing, but for prayer. Grace wore the beads her grandmother had given her beneath her wrapper, hidden from sight. When darkness fell, Malik appeared once more, standing where the sand met the water. He didn't speak, only watched her with an expression she couldn't read, half longing, half warning. The villagers avoided looking directly at him, but they edged closer to the water's edge, as if waiting for a sign. The moon would rise full tomorrow. Tonight was the last quiet moment Boma might ever know. Grace stood staring at the sea, wondering if she was looking at her salvation or her grave. The night arrived draped in silver light. The full moon hung heavy and perfect above the horizon, casting a path across the ocean that shimmered like liquid glass. The air was thick with the scent of salt and flowers from the offerings piled high on the shore. Every drumbeat echoed like a heartbeat through the village. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, her bare feet pressed into the cool sand. The beads from Mama Sua lay hidden under her wrapper, warm against her skin. Her parents flanked her, holding her hands tightly as if they could keep her anchored to the land by sheer will. Malik stood in the shallows, the water swirling around his ankles, his gaze fixed entirely on her. When the moon reached its highest point, the sea began to change. The water shimmered brighter, glowing from beneath as though lit by hundreds of lanterns. Then a deep, rolling sound rose from the depths, a hum that seemed to vibrate inside Grace's chest. The villagers stepped back, murmuring prayers, their faces pale. From the glowing water, a shape began to form. It was Yemaya, taller and more radiant than Grace had ever seen her in dreams, her gown woven from living waves, her crown gleaming with pearls the size of fists. She lifted her arms, and the ocean surged forward in answer. The goddess's voice filled the air without sound, wrapping itself around Grace's mind. "Come, my bride. The time has come." The waves reached Grace's knees, cool and smooth as silk. She could feel the pull, not just of the water, but of something inside her, a part that had always belonged to the sea. Yemaya's gaze was warm and commanding, like a mother welcoming her child home. Behind her, the villagers stood frozen, their fear and hope tangled together. She could hear her father's voice calling her name, but it sounded far away, muffled beneath the rhythm of the waves. Malik extended his hand toward her, his expression almost pleading now. Grace's heart pounded. If she went with the goddess, the wave would not come, and Boma would be safe. If she stayed, she risked the wrath of the sea, but she would keep her life, her family, her freedom. She felt the beads around her neck growing hotter, as if urging her to turn back. The hum of the ocean grew louder, rising into a deep roar. Behind Yemaya, the water began to climb into a wall, taller than the palm trees, its crest tipped with foam. Gasps broke out among the villagers as they saw the shadow of the wave towering above the goddess herself. Yemaya's voice pressed into Grace's mind again, softer this time. "Choose, child. Now." Grace's bare feet sank into the shifting sand as the tide pushed forward. The sound of the wave behind Yemaya was like the growl of a great beast, ready to strike. Malik stepped closer, the water lapping at his waist now, his hands still outstretched. Her father's voice cracked from the shore, calling her again, this time louder, desperate. She turned her head just enough to see his face, lined with fear, eyes wide and glassy. All around him, the villagers were shouting, some praying, some urging her to go with the goddess, others begging her to return. Yemaya's long, silver-blue robes swirled in the water, the shells in her hair catching the dim light. Her eyes never left Grace's, unblinking, certain. It felt as though the goddess could see every part of her, her fears, her dreams, the blood in her veins. The wave loomed higher now, casting the beach in shadow. Grace could feel its pull, the magnetic tug of the ocean reaching for her bones. The beads at her neck throbbed, and she remembered the promise she had made to herself that night she nearly drowned. Never again would she give herself to the sea. Yet now, it was the only way to save them all. Her breath caught, and she realized the choice had already begun to form inside her. Grace's chest rose and fell, the salt air heavy in her lungs. Yemaya's hand was still there, steady, patient, but the wave behind her was no longer patient. It towered like a mountain of glass and foam, its roar shaking the air. She turned toward the shore. Her father was on his knees now, his arms reaching out as if he could pull her back with sheer will. The villagers' cries mixed with the pounding of her heart. Malik's voice rose above them all, pleading, raw. Grace closed her eyes. She could almost hear the ocean whisper her name, not as a threat, but as a welcome. Her body trembled, not with fear, but with the strange certainty that she belonged both to the land and the sea. When she opened her eyes, she stepped forward into the water and took Yemaya's hand. The instant their fingers touched, the wave behind them split into 1,000 streams, collapsing into the sea with a deafening crash that sent spray into the sky. Light pure and blinding exploded from the beads at Grace's neck, spilling across the water and into the shore. The storm's fury melted into calm. The tide retreated. The villagers stood frozen, mouths open, as the goddess slowly released Grace's hand and began to sink beneath the surface. Yemaya's voice echoed in Grace's mind, soft, like the brush of a tide against sand. You are ready. Grace waded back toward the shore. Her father met her halfway, his arms wrapping around her before her feet even touched dry sand. Malik stood nearby, relief etched into every line of his face. The sea was calm now, but Grace knew it was only the beginning. Somewhere deep in the ocean, Yemaya was still watching.